Hi guys, welcome back. My name is Ashling. I have a film and television degree from UIL and I like talking about media. Ages ago I made this TikTok. I've literally been sitting here for an hour trying to record a video about how the context within which Dune the book was published and then the context within which Dune the movie is being published make them two different stories. And today I want to expand on the points that I made in it. In the interest of making this video as direct and to the point as possible, because there's so many tangents you could go on, so many. Here's what I'll be discussing and where in the video it'll appear.
Rolling over the sands, you can see spice in the air.
One of the tenets of media analysis is that media doesn't exist in a vacuum. And I feel that Dune 2021 is a very good example of that tenet because Dune is inherently political. Herbert was a journalist and had very, very strong political beliefs. And Dune, like all good sci-fi, is a story rooted in history, in current events. And that's its heart, that's its core. I think in trying to be loyal to the original text of the book, the movie betrayed the book's spirit.
Extreme temperatures and treacherous weather events make life outside the cities of Arrakis truly hostile.
Though he got the idea for the novel in the 50s, Frank Herbert actually wrote Dune between 1963 and 1965. Here are some key events that happened in the decade preceding the book's publishing. First, of course, was the Cold War, the signing of the Warsaw Pact and the drawing of the Iron Curtain in 1955, building of the Berlin Wall in 1961, and the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. We also see Brezhnev and Khrushchev come into power in the USSR and begin the process of de-Stalinization. In general, people begin questioning power structures within the USSR. This raises tensions between the USSR and the US, as the balance of power that has kept these two superpowers at a standstill since World War II begins to crumble. In terms of media, books, movies, you name it, the Cold War was also influential because of propaganda. American audiences were bombarded with pro-American anti-communist propaganda, and the Red Scare was only just ending. A second major current of events at the time were the global movements of liberation. We have the civil rights movement in the US, the beginnings of second wave feminism, and global decolonization. Frank Herbert was a journalist, and he was actually following the decolonization efforts in the Middle East, which in part inspired the story of Dune. We also have the subsequent collapse of the British Empire, which at its peak controlled 25% of the world, but by 1974 had lost well over 90% of its territory. The idea of empire and the global order was changing. Computers were also beginning to emerge and wow the world with their potential and power, though it would still be decades until they reached consumers. In American politics, the early 1960s saw JFK beat Nixon for the presidency and then get assassinated in 1963. Herbert cited both Nixon and JFK as inspirations for Dune. I wrote the Dune series because I had this idea that charismatic leaders ought to come with a warning label on their forehead, maybe dangerous to your health. One of the most dangerous presidents we had in this century was John Kennedy because people said, "Yes, sir, Mr. Charismatic Leader, what do we do next?" And we wound up in Vietnam. All over the world, the 60s were very, very politically unstable. People were still grappling with the effects of World War II. Dictatorships were kind of everywhere. Major, massive changes were happening to the world, and there was a lot of anxiety around that.
Remove your hand from the box, and you die.
What's in the box?
Pain.
Obviously, a lot of things have changed between 1965 and 2021. Here's some key events. The Cold War ended and the Soviet Union fell apart in 1991. Computers evolved from hyper-specialized instruments mainly used by scientists into everyday commodities. We saw the birth and evolution of AI, mass surveillance, data mining. We are increasingly more worried about our reliance on technology and are now seeing it as harmful rather than beneficial. In recent years, our idea of dangerous leaders changed too. It's no longer the charming, handsome, suave young man that we're worried about, but the loud, impulsive extremist. We're extremely wary of leaders that present themselves as messiahs and are also far more critical of religion. Also, there was a series of notable events specifically relating to the Middle East. In 1979, the Soviet Union entered Afghanistan to bolster its failing communist regime. America sent troops to back the Mujahideen, a guerrilla movement created to counter the Soviets. In 1984, a little-known man named Osama bin Laden traveled to Afghanistan. In 1988, he formed Al-Qaeda, and in 1995, a newly formed Islamist militia called the Taliban seized control of Afghanistan. Al-Qaeda, which now considered America as the ideological enemy of Islam, grew stronger under the Talib government. In 2001, they carried out the 9/11 terror attacks. This served as the catalyst for the US-led war on terror in the Middle East, which continued up to 2021. To support this continued military action overseas, most people in the West were bombarded with pro-military anti-Middle Eastern propaganda.
University of Bath investigation found that more than 800 feature films and 1,100 TV shows from 1911 to 2017 received support support from the US Department of Defense. Propaganda researcher Matthew Alford said the agency's influence on movies like Zero Dark 30 and The Recruit has inflated real-world threats and dampened down government malfeasance.
Islam was cast as this violent, warlike religion. The Middle East went from being the cradle of civilization into a dusty, war-torn land. I cannot understate how much propaganda affects the way we interact with the world and how different it is now to what it was in the 1960s. People in America, certainly, and in the West in general, were more focused on Russia and on the USSR. Like, that was the big global threat in their time. They were not really thinking about the Middle East. It was mostly associated with Jesus. The Middle East was where all of these amazing Hollywood epics were taking place. It wasn't a place where dangerous people come from. Certainly people in the 60s, they probably wouldn't have had the most positive outlook on the Middle East because, you know, they were racist, but they wouldn't have had such a negative one as we do now. So to recap that, Dune the book is coming out when Orientalism isn't really a thing people know. The white savior trope is common and people don't really have a problem with it yet. The US is warring with a major proto-imperialist power. The Middle East is a relative unknown, or at least doesn't carry intensely negative connotations for readers. And war is bad and religion is good. Dune the movie, however, is coming out when we know Orientalism is bad. We know that the white savior trope is bad. The US is warring with small militant religious extremists. The Middle East has very, very negative connotations for viewers. And war is good and religion is bad. Obviously, there's very many similarities between societies in 1960 and societies now, but the point specifically that Dune seems to hit, they have changed. And that's an important thing to acknowledge.
You don't get it, do you? You don't really understand the grave nature of what's happening to us.
So why is all of this a problem? When adapting a story, you have two choices: stick to the script or stick to the spirit. A good example of this is Little Women. In the original book, Jo gets married, and in the 2020 movie, she doesn't. When the book was published, teaching girls to aspire to marriage was like a good thing because women didn't really have access to the same financial securities that they have now, and therefore the path to financial security and a good life was marriage. In 2020 though, teaching girls that they should only aspire to marriage is like not a fantastic thing because they now have other options. Little Women is about celebrating womanhood and independence, and it was quite progressive for its time. So the 2020 version tries to keep with the spirit of that by adapting the story to teach the same progressive morals, but to a modern audience.
We'll cross after dark. That's how the Fremen do it.
Societies change, our values and our views change, and sometimes a story that meant one thing at one time means something completely different now. This is normal. So what do I think they should have done? I mean, first of all, they should have hired more Middle Eastern and North African creatives. Like, this is basic. Middle Eastern and North African people should take part in telling stories about themselves. There was not a single MENA writer involved in the creation of Dune. There weren't even any major Middle Eastern and North African actors. Come on, this should have been a very obvious solution. A second thing they should have done is realize that there were negative tropes within the original story. You know, the imagery that meant really nothing to 1960s readers, but to us is very reminiscent of the Iraqi and Afghan wars, portraying MENA characters as a faceless lump or zealously religious. Should they have diverged from the book to fix these issues? Probably. When you have a story as complicated as Dune and as forward-thinking and as ambitious as Dune, and you transport it 70 years into the future and you keep telling the same story, it doesn't work because the world 70 years on is very different. It would have been a lot more in the spirit of Herbert to adapt it to modern times. This video has been really difficult for me to make because even as I've been recording and editing it, I hadn't figured out a way of putting down my thought coherently. But essentially, the meaning of an artwork is found in the interaction of the artist and the viewer. Dune is not about the war on terror. It can't be, it was written in 1965. But to modern audiences, that is what we're thinking of when we're watching it.
The Emperor asks us to bring peace to Arrakis.
To disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger.
It was the filmmakers' jobs to realize this and to let that guide their creative process. Context matters, context changes, and context must be respected.
I don't know date palms could even be found out here.
Oh, these aren't indigenous. They can't survive without me.
What I'm really upset about is I feel that this is wasted potential. This came out the same year that the US pulled out of Afghanistan. And this story could have resonated with modern audiences had those connections been exploited. From a purely filmmaking perspective, I actually did enjoy Dune. Like, I'm a really big Denis Villeneuve fan, and I will probably be seeing the second Dune movie, but I thought it was important to talk about these issues because, you know, It's fun. It's interesting. This is what I do. I have a film degree. I have to misuse it somehow. If you have had different opinions about this, please let me know what they were. I would love to hear what you thought. And yeah, I will see you guys in another video. Bye. Also, check out my t-shirt.
How much will it cost them, traveling all this way for this formality?
3 guild navigators, a total of 1.46 million, 62 salaries round trip.